The principles that will guide our administration are very simple. Nigeria will be impartially governed according to the rule of law.
President Bola Tinubu at his inauguration on May 29. But what is the plan to achieve this objective? The Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Lateef Fagbemi, gives some insights in his speech at the opening ceremony of the recently concluded 2023 Annual General Conference of the Nigerian Bar Association.
With the general support of Mr. President, my ministry will dedicate its time and resources in the promotion of people-centered justice, in the implementation of the much-needed legal and judicial reforms. We will maintain fair, transparent, and responsive process that will reflect the aspirations of Nigerians in the overall promotion of the rule of law and administration of justice.
He goes on to list the areas in which he will provide critical leadership, improving and strengthening strategic relationships among all the arms of government and the justice sector, facilitating a responsive justice system that promotes public confidence in the administration of justice and adherence to the rule of law, introducing reforms in the laws, the judicial systems, and law enforcement with a view to achieving compliance with extant laws and judicial decisions, benchmarking investment law regime to favorably compare with global best practices, and this supports other economic growth regeneration initiatives. However, promises like these have been made by past administrations, and the reforms they introduced to reposition the judiciary and improve the capacity and capability of the anti-graft agencies did not resolve the issues afflicting the sector. The problems of access to justice, delay in the process of justice delivery, the independence of the judiciary and financial autonomy, unlawful and arbitrary killings, arbitrary arrest, severe restrictions on free expression and media, including violence or threats against journalists, are still as prominent as at when democracy returned in 1999.
At the end of the day, it's the leaders, it's the political people who interpret the rule of law to suit themselves. For instance, President Buhari said that the rule of law is subservient to national security. So that's his own interpretation. But I think there's only one interpretation. The rule of law stands above all of us. Without rule of law, you can't grow.
To underline the challenges of the adherence to the dictates of the rule of law in the country, the U.S. Department of State's 2021 Nigeria Country Report deplored unlawful and arbitrary arrest, detention and torture of political activists and critics, as well as restrictions on freedom of the press and association. Already, the Tinubu administration is being criticized for the way it is handling the arrest, detention and investigation of the former governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Godwin Emefiele, and the suspended chairman of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, Abdulrasheed Bawa. Both men have been in detention since operatives of the Department of State Services DSS arrested them in June, and while Mr. Emefiele has been charged to court, the government has simply refused to release or charge Mr. Bawa. Beyond this, many have also cited the issue of the unnecessary clashes between security agencies, particularly between the EFCC and DSS, the DSS and correctional officers, and the police and the army, with the consensus being that the government must articulate a coherent policy framework that clearly defines the roles and relationships between and among the agencies, especially those involved in the criminal justice system. At the end of the day, the rule of law is everyone's business.
Generally, it's not well appreciated that the concept of rule of law applies to everybody. It's not just a question of the executive disobeying court orders. It also applies even to the judges themselves. The need for them to uphold the law as enacted by the competent authority of the National Assembly.
Strong opposition. Strong opposition parties. Multi-partism. So strong civil society, strong media. Look at President Trump. In spite of all the judges he appointed, 62 cases that he put into court in order to stage a coup on America. It failed. It was the concept of the rule of law and strong institutions that stopped him.
Will government at all levels pay lip service to the issue of rule of law? Will the citizens play their part? The next 3.5 years are critical. Shola Shoyeli, Channels Television News.
Well, earlier we spoke with the immediate past dean of the Faculty of Law, Redeemers University at Osun State, Professor Bukola Akinola. And I started by asking him why adherence to the rule of law has remained a challenge, and that's in spite of government after government's promise to be guided by that same rule of law.
The incursion of the military into governance in Nigeria did not help with the rule of law, because you remember, once they come into office, they suspend the Constitution, especially Chapter 4, which deals with human rights. So that has not helped. Then our African culture, our monarchy system. So it's a process. Every great nation attains democratic values through a process. Thank you.
That's quite interesting. But now we've practiced democracy for, over 23 years now. A new government came into power about 3 months ago. What for you would you say should be the rule of law agenda of this administration?
Yes, thank you. The new government just came on board on May 29, 2023, and today is 4th of October. There is going to be a lot of reforms that I am aware of, and with the nation is blessed with the new Attorney General of the Federation, the person of Prince Lateef Fagbemi, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. And you discover that appointment is applauded across the legal hemisphere in Nigeria. And I am sure he just came into office. He's going to actually set an agenda. In terms of justice sector reforms, there will be a lot of reforms. I am aware there will also be moves to amend some provisions of the Constitution in order to allow for proper democratic for us to sensitize our law enforcement agencies. Human rights. You can't talk about rule of law without talking about human rights. So once we advance in terms of enforcement of human rights, we make a lot of progress.
I think it was the government of former President Muhammad Buhari that made that statement that the rule of law is subservient to national security. And this, of course, generated a lot of debate at that time. But how does a government, and by extension, the people, how do we dissuade government from a mindset such as that?
So I don't believe rule of law is subservient to national security. National security is very vital. And I am sure the President, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, that I know, being a Democrat, who has also fought in the trenches during the Nadeko days in 1993 and around that period, engaging the Abacha regime and all that, I am sure that we cannot trade national security. And at the same time, we cannot trade rule of law. But let me say this, in terms of human rights enforcement, in terms of human rights enjoyment, human rights cannot be absolute. Human rights cannot be absolute. If you look at Section 45 of the Constitution, your rights can be curtailed on grounds of public health, public policy, and public order. That does not mean you will not enjoy your right, but your right should not endanger public health, public policy. And I can't say because I have freedom of speech and I will go and defame your character. You are going to sue me and I know the consequence. So I'm not going to do that. So I am not of that school of thought that believe that national security should endanger rule of law. At the same time, you can't overstretch rule of law to endanger national security. There are a lot of things that our security and our intelligence agencies do behind the scene to make us safe. There are times they will go and get a court order to further detain an accused person, but they won't go on here to say we have gotten a court order, we want to detain so and so. And when they gather their intelligence, they work, they process it. So there must be a balance, and that's where I will stop. There must be a balance.